Okay, and it's my pleasure right now to just give you a little bit of an introduction to the lovely Kim, who's wearing a very pretty pink top. Um, Kim K from Santa Maria. And so here is a little bit about her. Kim started her 12-step journey in 1997 when she read Codependent No More and was given a college class assignment at college to attend a 12-step meeting and report back to the class. This led her to Codependence Anonymous. um, After working through the CODA steps with the sponsor, as well as with multiple fellow traveler workbook studies, she and the fellow travelers shifted to the ACA workbook in 2005. She continued to participate in ACA workbook studies until 2010, when she started an ACA women's meeting. Yay! Throughout her recovery time, Kim has actively supported workshops as an organizer, facilitator, and participant, sponsored numerous people through the 12 steps, and supported the growing ACA program in various service positions. We have to give away what we have so generously been given. Over to you, Kim. Can't wait to hear you.
Thank you, Lucy. Appreciate it. Well, I was thinking today, what is it about this whole sponsorship thing that matters most to me? And I wanted to kind of hit the different directions of sponsorship because I feel like each of our experiences is a little bit unique. And so that's why that bio has those different steps I took. Everybody has a way in, and mine happened to be because it was a classroom assignment. And I just laugh because it's whatever it takes. And the thing that kept me in recovery initially was my kids, because I wanted to be a better parent, because I didn't want to be just like my parents. Again, whatever it takes. And then it became about the relationships I was in. That's why I stayed in recovery. So anyway, and now here I am all these years later, it's finally about me. Like now I'm here for me. I'm here forevermore, and I remember when I first came in, I wasn't sure about that. So anyway, my journey started with coming to my first meeting, and right away they talk about how important it is to get a sponsor. And so I immediately started looking for one. And so what I wanted to share about a little bit today is, how do we find a sponsor? How do we find somebody to work with? And so what I did is I started saying in my meetings, yeah, I'm ready to start my steps, and I really would love to find a sponsor. And I was hoping somebody would tell me they're available. And sure enough, some people did. And so I ended up choosing a person to be my sponsor. And it was back in the day where we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have text messages, we just had phones, and you could leave a voice message. And my first sponsor, I didn't know yet to really interview somebody. I just assumed she would be the one. And so we started down that path together. And what I discovered was she wanted to be a sponsor, and I wanted a sponsor, but we actually couldn't really be a good fit. And she wasn't, part of what made that happen is she wasn't available. I'd make phone calls and we'd try to talk about things, and she wouldn't call me back, or it was never a good time for her, or things like that. So one of the things I wanted to share today is, if we're looking for a sponsor, we got to get out there and look. We have to have the courage to ask for help. We have to have the courage to do whatever it takes, which means raising our hand, right? And asking different people. But then we want to find somebody that's a good fit. And I really lucked out, because my next person that I asked, she was just the perfect first sponsor for me. It was kind of funny because we started out with a conversation about what she was willing to do for me and what she wasn't willing to do for me. And so I got exposed right away to boundaries. I got exposed to negotiating in relationships, which was really helpful. And I feel like that's a big part of sponsoring and being sponsored. It's learning how to have relationships with another person. And when I came into recovery, I didn't know how to have really good relationships, actually, because I didn't have boundaries yet. I didn't know about boundaries. So she very clearly set up our agreement, and I agreed to the things she offered she could do for me. And, she said she could do it for a year. She said we needed to stay focused on the steps. She didn't want to do other things. Let's stay on the steps. And we had specific times that we were going to meet. And then she was available at other times too. And so one of the things I was looking for, and she definitely fit that for me, is I like structure. That's something I like. Now, not everybody needs it the same way I did, but I needed that structure in my sponsorship relationship. I needed to know that she would be there if I called, and she promised me she would do the best she could. And that's the best anybody can do, right? So we had our set times that we met. We kept working on the steps, and she would bring her experience in of working the steps. She would bring in other things related, because back when we were doing it, there weren't all the lovely books that we have today yet. And so she would bring her worksheets that she used for step work, and we would work on those together. And it was just so amazing to have another person that would commit her time to me, because that was one of my wounds coming into recovery, is I didn't want to take up too much space. It wasn't safe to take up space. I wasn't worth taking up somebody's time, and to have her carve out time for me on a regular and consistent basis was just phenomenal. Talk about feeling supported, encouraged. She also gave me that accountability, and I feel like that's part of what a sponsor can offer, is accountability to keep working on the steps, because they get hard. Sometimes they get a little too hard, or they get a little too scary. And having that person who was willing to stand beside me and give me encouragement when I needed it, and help me find my hope when I was a little bit hopeless. So all those things she was teaching me, having that accountability to keep moving forward. And we got through the 12 steps, and it felt so good. So finding the right sponsor matters. It's finding that person, right? That's a good fit for us. And we're all so different. So that felt really important to talk about. And, I was looking in the definition, I was trying to find a definition for sponsor and sponsorship. And of course, what I found online had to do not so much with 12-step recovery. It was more about a business or whatever. And so what it said about sponsoring, so sponsoring somebody, something or someone in the act of supporting an event, activity, person, or organization financially, or through the provision of products or services. That's a lot of words, but what it's trying to say is somebody that literally is there supporting another person for a service or through a service. Now, it might have been financial. In this case, we sponsor with our time, right? We're giving our time. We're giving our time for another person, and somebody gave me their time. And that was so important for me. So let's see, that first person, that first sponsor. So once we get done with the steps, the question comes up, when do you sponsor somebody? I've done the steps, but I'm pretty darn new. I'm only just barely into my recovery program. I don't know, am I ready to be a sponsor? So I asked people, when are you ready to be a sponsor? And I was hearing, well, if you're one step ahead of somebody, you can be a sponsor. You just have to be one step ahead. I'm like, ooh, that feels a little scary. I don't feel quite like I'd be ready yet. So then I heard, well, maybe if they've completed through at least the fourth step, they have a sponsor, they're actively working the steps, they've done at least the four steps, maybe then they're enough ahead of me, or I'm enough ahead of them. So I ended up deciding to go all the way through the steps, because I didn't feel like I would be bringing much to the table. So again, that's my low self-esteem, right? I still had that low self-esteem that was feeling like I don't have anything to offer the world. I don't know what they could learn from me. So that's how I knew at some point it was important to be a sponsor. It's part of my healing journey. It's part of the next step, right? So one, we have to give away what we've so freely been given. But two, I have to have the courage to keep trying new things, right? That's how I heal. So we go from hurting to healing to helping. And there were so many things that were hurting. And my first sponsor helped me start heal some of that, right? So then I could start helping somebody. So I found when my first sponsor, we got through our first year, that was our agreement. And as soon as we got through the 12 steps, at that point, she and I agreed to transition ourselves to be fellow travelers. And so basically at that point, we agreed we were going to co-sponsor. She had worked the steps, I had worked the steps. So now what our meetings were like when we came together is we'd come together and she would share about something she was working on in life, and maybe get some feedback or support from me, challenging, holding her accountable, supporting, encouraging. And then we'd each take turns, right? So that's how our meetings turned out to be after that first year, once we had gotten through the steps. And then at some point, then that was it. She had health issues. And so she went away and was no longer in my life. So I felt so honored to get to be a part of that process with her, to be able to actually support her as she was transitioning out of this lifetime. So again, it's like I was learning how to have relationships with people. So sponsoring for me and being sponsored. It's about learning how to show up for each other in different capacities. And so by the time she had passed, I had found counselors. I've been in counseling a lot of years, and I found counseling and 12 steps works beautifully together because I'm scratching at all of my character defects in my 12-step recovery. And I have a counselor who's helping me kind of look at it from a different angle. And so I didn't go get another sponsor per se. What I did instead was we started doing fellow traveler workbook studies. So I did a workbook study at our community college. They had 12 steps a way out. I didn't really care what 12 steps I was working as long as I was doing them. And we also started doing workbook studies in my home. We would go other places, and always, how do you start one of those? You'd raise your hand, or you'd say during your sharing, hey, I'm thinking I really need to start working the steps. Does anybody want to do it with me? If you do, let me know, because I'm thinking I'm going to start like next month. And usually somebody would raise their hand, and that's how we'd form our little groups. And so we'd form these groups together, and we'd have that first meeting, and we'd try to figure out what's important here. What do we need to have an effective workbook study? And you know what the beautiful thing is? I don't know that we ever got it right. We always had things come up in these workbook studies. We hadn't made enough agreements up front, right? So we'd end up with, well, but I can't meet then, and I can't meet then, and I can't show up. And so we're trying to do the workbook study, and like 3 of the people aren't showing up. And we hadn't talked about yet, how do you bring new people in? I know this friend, I know we're already on step 4, but I have this friend, she'd really benefit from joining us. What do you think? And so it's like we had to discover those things together. And I found that was the beautiful thing of doing a fellow traveler model, is we're literally having to figure it out as we go. We're having to figure it out together. And we had to bring the traditions in because it got messy. It often got messy because that's what happens when you have messy human beings there. But with the framework of our recovery programs, we were all there for a single purpose. It was to try to get better. It was try to be better human beings. And so we had that messy space where we learned new tricks. And so what we learned over time, what I learned over time as I kept going into different workbook studies is, okay, so we got to have that initial meeting. And you know what, maybe we got to plan to have business meetings periodically as needed, just like other meetings, even though it's just a workbook study meeting. Maybe we need to agree how we're going to come into the group or leave the group, because it feels kind of yucky as an ACA, or especially if somebody just leaves the group. I have abandonment issues and I'm codependent, right? So now I'm all worried about them. And so those were things that we had to think about as we were forming our groups up. And when we bumped into something new we hadn't thought of before, the beautiful thing with recovery is that's our chance to try to figure it out together. So again, relationships. How do we show up? I'm a controller. How do I show up not knowing and let it unfold when I want to control it? And this is what we're going to do, right? So I guess the message I'm saying is, however we show up for each other, whether it's with a sponsor, whether it's with a fellow traveler, whether I'm the sponsor, like whatever capacity we're in, it's all about relationships and learning how to have relationships together. And it's about asking for help. It's about asking for permission. It's about showing up courageously to try new things and take the risk of having it not go the way we planned. That's where my recovery is. So those are some of the things that came up initially for me. Then I was wondering, well, what do I do now? So I did want to keep trying to be a sponsor. And I say trying to be a sponsor because sponsorship unfolds all the time for me. It's not a destination either, just like recovery, sponsorship. It's just part of the program that's ongoing forevermore. And so I tried to have my first sponsees. I started raising my hand, when I was doing my sharing and meetings, going, gosh, I feel like it would be fun to try sponsoring somebody at some point. I feel like I'm almost ready. And sure enough, higher power eventually brought somebody in to give me a try. And I was horrified because, oh no, I might screw it all up. But I did the best I could. And what I started learning there is just like forming up these fellow traveler groups where I didn't know how it worked yet. I didn't know how to sponsor yet either. And so what that looked like is, on my first sponsee, I didn't realize how important it was to meet and set up our agreements together. Like literally, what are the agreements? What are we coming here to do? And kind of where I'm at a lot of times later in the process is now I'm willing to meet with somebody. If they want to have a sponsor and I might be that person, I want to meet with them so that they can see if they fit with me, but so I can see if I fit with them, because some people, I can't quite do it. It's not going to be a good fit. There's just no chemistry, or there's something that feels too hard. And I used to think I had to do it anyway, because I mean, if somebody asks to be a sponsor, of course you say yes to everything in the program, right? And what I'm learning is, well, actually, but it's got to be good for them and me. That's part of my recovery today, right? So now I interview people to see if we're going to be a good fit. And we talk about things like how frequently we're going to meet, how available am I? You know, I have a job and I have other things, and so do they. So what is this agreement we're making for how available I am? And one of the things I found for myself is I give more time and attention when somebody is my sponsee, right? So it's like in the priorities of life. I mean, I got my job and I got my things I got to do for me. But if I have a sponsor, that's a higher commitment level. So when they reach out to get a hold of me, the agreement usually is, I'm going to get back to you as fast as I can, recognizing I have a job and I have other things, but I'm going to reach out. We're going to try to hook up as soon as you need to. And they have that higher priority than other people that are just out there with me in the recovery world. I always try to reach out to people in recovery, but a sponsee is somebody I have that little bit higher commitment to. And that was one of the things that stood out for me, again, as I think back over time. Again, that first sponsor relationship I had was that high level of commitment she had for me. Like how important it was to have somebody that did not abandon me, somebody that was there available when things got hard. And the beautiful thing about having that, at least one other person, or maybe it's the group of fellow travelers, the beautiful thing with a group is now you can call multiple people when you need it. But it's being able to reach out to somebody when those things come up that are too hard.
5 minutes.
Thank you. They come up that are too hard, and we have somebody there to travel the road with us. They share their experience. They give us that encouragement. They're doing prayers with us, meditate, like whatever it takes, they're right there. So we can take those next steps. And I so appreciate that. And I want to give that whenever I say to somebody, I'll be your sponsor. I want to have that ability to commit. So another thing I wanted to bring up today is how does it work when it's time to end the relationship? Because that can get tricky too. Again, it's part of relationships, right? Our relationships, we start relationships, we have relationships, and then sometimes relationships need to transition for various reasons. Sometimes it's just time to. So with my sponsor that I had initially, she was very clear. This is what I'm willing to do, and then we're going to transition our relationship. And I agreed to that up front. I've sometimes had relationships with sponsees where we're in a relationship for a long period of time, and I'm realizing, you know what, there's so many of us that need help in this program. There's so many of us that need to get through the steps for that first time, that I needed to be available to let new people in. So if I have somebody that's going on a long time, I can't help a new person. So I had to make that decision for myself. And what I realized is it's so important, especially with ACA, to make sure we don't ever abandon people. That's so important. So for me, what that looked like was making sure I let the person know that, hey, here's my availability. Here's what's changing for me. Here's what I can offer. How can we start making this change now? How can we start talking about it now? So in 6 months or whatever that time period is that we agree to, we've done everything that you wanted to get done in that period of time, because then I'm going to need transition, or maybe it's them that needs transition. So again, how do we have that conversation when it's time to let go? So as I end today, I was trying to think of what's like a metaphor of what it's like doing this whole sponsoring, fellow traveler, whatever models that we use. And I was realizing for me, it's going down to the river, and we get to choose a kayak, right? And I can get in that kayak and I can go in it and start paddling down the river myself. And that's pretty exciting, pretty fun. And it's gonna be a bumpy ride, and I'm gonna figure it out because I'm very, self-sufficient. But another option might be that I go down there on that dock and there's other kayaks there too. And so I make an agreement with another person. Let's get in that kayak. Let's get in one together and head down the river. And so we choose to do a 2-person kayak, especially when it's that one-on-one relationship. And it's so exciting because that person actually has more experience than me if I'm the sponsee, right? They have more experience. So they say, hey, did you put on your sunscreen? We're going to be out for a while. They've done it before, right? And they tell me, hey, you might want a hat too, actually, because it gets pretty hot. That sun gets in your eyes. oh, you know what? And here, have one of these, snack bars and a bag of nuts, because you just tuck it in the side there because you might need that along the way. And so we hop into the river in our kayaks, and now we start paddling. And when we hit those rapids or the tide went out or whatever it is, we work it together. And that person has just a little more experience than me. So I don't have to be so afraid. I'm getting to do something I was scared to do on my own, but this person's doing it with me. And all of a sudden it's like, you know what, I can do this. Even if I don't know how to do it, I'll figure it out because we have somebody here. We'll do it together. And it's so amazingly powerful. So I just so appreciate this journey. I love all aspects of it. I love that, I could use a counselor for a lot of years and I didn't have a sponsor. I just picked fellow travelers along the way to help me here and there on step stuff, because that's what felt safe for me at the time. And I love that we have our tribe, that here we all are today with the tribe. We're all looking for our different things and we're supporting each other along the way. So thank you so much for letting me share my experience with you today. Appreciate it.